The Witcher 3 has dozens of haunting and disturbing monsters, but you might not know that the inspiration for many of them lie in some really strange, gnarly folklore. Diving into mythology and seeing what exactly medieval Europeans were most afraid of can really shed light on what makes the fantastical creatures of The Witcher so haunting. Haunting at least when you're not totally distracted with side quests.
Lost your key, ma'am?
No, not me key, me pan.
Playing Gwent, and talking to pigs.
Alright, let's talk.
There may be minor spoilers for in-game quests ahead, but let's dive right in and start the story. Botchlings. These grotesque zombies are the tragic result of an improperly buried child after it has died. Hunting pregnant women at night, the botchling drains the mother of her strength before brutally killing both her and the fetus. You might think it'd be no problem for the white wolf to defeat an evil ghost baby, but if a giant frog proved to be a tough opponent, you may want to reconsider attacking the botchling in the Family Matters main quest. When threatened, the foot-long botchling can change form, growing into a deformed, powerful man. Botchlings are based partially on mylings, the ghosts of discarded or unbaptized infants in Scandinavian folklore. Mylings were said to have roamed the land and jumped on the backs of lone travelers, demanding to be taken to a graveyard and buried properly. But as the traveler neared a graveyard, the myling became heavier and more difficult to carry, and if the traveler couldn't make it before the myling's patience was up, it would ragefully kill them. Similar creatures that also inspired the botchlings were the Slavic Poroniek and Dracovic, which were deceased children or infants that similarly turned into hostile demons when abandoned. However, if it was given a proper burial at the family home, instead of becoming wandering demons, they would become a protective house spirit. Much like how if botchlings are given a proper name through an elven naming ritual, their curse can be lifted, turning them into a docile spirit called a lubberkin. It's generally assumed these folktales about vengeful mylings and Poroniek exist to discourage people from committing the sadly common middle-aged practices of child abandonment and infanticide. Even Hansel and Gretel is about the dangers that children face out on their own. I'd definitely say that the in-game origins of botchlings and the folklore they're based in are equally tragic and unsettling. Noonwraiths. When the sun reached its highest point in the sky on a hot summer day, farmers on the brink of exhaustion were said to have visions of dancing maidens that drew them in and killed them.
Let's dance.
Encountered in the contract quests Devil by the Well and the White Lady, the inspiration for Noonwraiths directly lie in Slavic folklore. Known in Poland as Poludnica, meaning Lady Midday, this mythological creature takes the form of whirling clouds of dust and carries a scythe and shears. On hot days in rural fields, the spirit attempts to start conversations with delirious field workers and farmers, but if anyone fails to answer her or tries to change the subject, she'll decapitate them with her scythe or strike them with a heart attack. These haunting creatures are now widely believed to basically be the personification of heat stroke that field laborers risk suffering. Symptoms of heat stroke include hallucinations and seeing or hearing imaginary people, so that makes sense. However, this fear of Lady Midday somewhat led to the practice of taking breaks during the day to avoid her wrath and avoid exhaustion. But Geralt sure doesn't seem to have a problem with facing Noonwraiths. Visually similar to Noonwraiths and similar to fight, Plague Maidens in The Witcher 3 are spirits that personify disease and pestilence. Annabelle, encountered in the quest A Tower Full of Mice, is a spirit revealed to be a Plague Maiden after she was eaten alive by rats, being rendered defenseless by a paralyzing potion during a riot. That is a rough demise. In The Witcher, the Catriona Plague, also known as the Red Death, swept through the northern kingdoms much like the bubonic plague did in Europe. The bestiary describes Catriona diseased patients as having visions of a decrepit ghost resembling an old woman covered in scabs and boils. As stated eloquently in the Witcher 3 art book, her rotten, worm-ridden flesh is covered in a ragged shroud, seemingly woven from miasma and foul vapors. Crawling out from under it are dozens of plague-bearing rats. Yikes! That's some very specific language. I feel like I can smell the Plague Maiden from here. Plague Maidens are closely inspired by the Scandinavian spirit Pesta, the physical embodiment of the bubonic plague. The word Pesta, or pest, is literally Norwegian for plague. The spirit of Pesta was an old woman dressed in black that wiped out entire populations with illness, including a third of Denmark's population and nearly half of Norway's in just 4 years during the 14th century. Pesta traveled from village to town, bringing and spreading the Black Plague with her. It was said that if you saw her carrying a rake, you'd know she'd only take a few lives, but if you saw her sweeping with her broomstick, there would be mass fatalities. Of the many creatures in the Witcher universe, the Noonwraiths and Plague Maidens are some of the most loyal to their folklore and some of the most creepy. If you've played The Witcher, you know there's a bit of nudity, so be warned for the next section. Alps. Who could forget the screeching, blood-covered vampires from the Blood and Wine expansion that creep around on the tips of their toes? Alps are based in Germanic folklore and are actually similar to elves, at least the more traditional, morbid idea of elves. Alps in The Witcher and Alps in Folklore are both gray-skinned shapeshifters with pointy ears, but they're typically male, while their female counterparts are called Mare or Mara. Similar to their in-game abilities, Middle Age folklore describes Alps seeking out sleeping targets in the night and twisting their dreams into horrific nightmares. In fact, even the German word for nightmare, Albtraum, literally means elf dream. Alps perch on the chest of their sleeping victims and become heavier and heavier until the victim wakes up being crushed, unable to move or breathe under the Alps' weight. Interestingly enough, these attacks from creatures across different cultures are so prevalent it's now believed that these were early explanations for sleep paralysis, which is when a person wakes up feeling totally unable to move or breathe, as well as possibly sleep apnea, night terrors, or lucid dreams. But Alps also happen to like pulling pranks, like magically making milk turn sour, or tangling people's hair into elf knots, or putting babies back into soiled diapers. Wait, what? Crushing farm animals to death? And even drinking blood from the nipples of men and young children? Yeah. Okay, maybe it's best that the Alps in The Witcher don't stick completely to their folklore, but they are definitely still creepy in their own way. The Witcher 3 has a complex world that aims for both fantasy and realism. A senior environment artist on the game, Jonas Mattsson, even said, "We don't rely on the classic fantasy tropes. When we create our world, we create it based off how people used to live and what they used to believe." Some of the truly horrifying qualities of the game's monsters may be as horrifying as they are because they're based on real fears and real human experiences. Hopefully no one actually had a vampire elf on their chest giving them nightmares, but you never know. Either way, The Witcher 3, without a doubt, has some seriously creepy, quirky, and unforgettable enemies.